Hey DC Mac, we need to do a quick little thing for you on unemployment. So, what the heck is unemployment other than not having a job? Well, of course, being the United States, we have a very specific definition for this. So, economics defines the labor force as all non-military people who are either employed or unemployed. So, to be considered employed, you have to be 16 years of older and meet at least one of the following requirements. You have to work for at least 1 hour for pay within the last week, work 15 or more hours without pay in a family business, or hold a job but you didn't work because of an illness, vacation, or something like that. So when I was homesick last week, it doesn't mean I was unemployed, I was just homesick, right? If we go on Christmas vacation, your teachers are not unemployed, they're just on vacation. If you work in a family business, that's the weird one, but they assume that because you're working for your family, they're going to go ahead and support you with food and clothing and housing if you're working for a significant amount in that family business. So to be considered unemployed, you have to be 16 years or older and, sorry about that, not have a job. You have to actively have looked for work in the last 4 weeks, and you have to be currently available for work. So you can't be unemployed if you currently have a job, even if you hate it, right? You have to actually look for work. So if you're looking for work, you're applying for jobs, you're great, you can be considered unemployed. But if you are done looking for work, you're discouraged, you're staying at home, you're not getting any interviews, then you would not be considered unemployed if you haven't looked for work in the last 4 weeks. So you'll notice that there's this gap between employed and unemployed. So there are some people who are not employed, they're not unemployed, they're kind of other. Some of these are like military personnel. But when you get signed up for the military, you can't just decide to quit and get another job. You're in the military until they say you're not. So you wouldn't be considered part of our labor force. Somebody like a stay-at-home mom. She's not looking for a job, she hasn't looked for work, she's not interested in work, she's taking care of her kids and doing the awesome family thing that she's doing. That means she's not employed, she's not unemployed, she just exists. She's not part of our labor force. So in the United States, we want to have something that we call full employment. An unemployment rate of around 4 to 6% is considered normal. We do expect unemployment to exist. We actually want that to happen. That's a good thing. Because if you think about it, what if INL needed to hire people, but there were literally nobody available to apply for their jobs except for a waitress from the Applebee's? That might be a really nice woman and she might be really fantastic, but that doesn't mean she's qualified to be a nuclear engineer. So you need some people to be unemployed so they can get the jobs that open up. So, because it's econ, of course we have graphs, right? If you remember on the left-hand side, our production possibilities frontiers, if you consider our red line to be our PPC at full employment, you would be on the line. So if you look at kind of where we would be with some percentages of unemployment, 4 to 6% unemployment would be our full employment ideal. You would be considered to be on the line of the PPC. If I have 6%, 8%, 10%, I would be having a problem of some sort, so I would be inside the curve of the PPC. If I have less than 4% of unemployment, I would be super low. I'd have some sort of inflation. If I'm at 0% unemployment, I'm at maximum capacity. Things are not good. I need to grow that economy to support the amazing growth that's happening. If you look at the business cycle that we've got here on the bottom right, it's the same sort of thing. When I hit that kind of ideal GDP growth line, I'm in good shape. When unemployment is really, really low, that's when I'm in a recession. When unemployment is really, really high, as far as having people all having jobs, that means that the economy is growing like gangbusters. Things are really, really good. So when we look at this kind of ideal range for unemployment, what you're going to see is that mostly the United States is in that zone, except for a couple of little economic blips that we've had. If you remember this one from U.S. history, we talked about that one last year in my class. The most easy one to look at is the Great Depression. We were definitely outside of that ideal employment zone. Well, what happened in the 1940s to pull us out of that 15+% unemployment and put us all the way down here to 1% unemployment? That's the war, right? Because when those guys go off to war, they're not counted as the labor force. They're employed by the military. But you also have people in civilian jobs who are working at factories and working on the home front to make sure that things were happening to help us win the war. So we can take unemployment and look at it by county and see how we're doing. In this map, the darker the color, the higher the unemployment. You'll notice that Idaho, we're generally pretty good. We fall, for most cases, into that range of acceptable employment. Idaho tends to be a pretty great state to get a job. When you get to the bigger cities, that's where you tend to see those really high unemployment labels. So one of the things that we know about unemployment is that it doesn't just affect everybody the exact same. In our economy, if we have a 4.7% unemployment rate overall, what we know is that African Americans are going to be more unemployed. So are white teenagers. So are African American teenagers. So we can pull different groups out of these statistics and look at how they compare and kind of look at, okay, is this a problem? Is it not a problem? I would say teenagers, you probably should be in school, but if you want a job and you want to be employed, then 31% unemployment probably is an issue that we could address as a country and make everybody better. If I look at percent of the labor force over time, what we know is that more women are entering the labor force as we go through time. More women are working careers and also balancing family life. What we also see is that less kids are entering the labor force. That under 25 status is actually decreasing. Why? Because college. After World War II, we passed the GI Bill that said if you go to college, we're going to pay for it for you if you're a military veteran. So a lot of people took advantage of that. Well, that meant there's a whole generation of guys who have college as a basic entry-level qualification for a job. Well, so as we go through time, more and more and more kids are up against the last generation, they all had bachelor's degrees. Where is yours? So because more kids are going to college, you have less in that under 25 range down here because you guys are all in school at that point and not unemployed. We tend to look at state unemployments. They don't usually last super long because people will move from state to state, but there are some that really have trouble, like Michigan. It's got Detroit in it. They're going to be really kind of problematic. But it doesn't mean you're going to move from Idaho to Michigan and try and get a job. It just means that you're going to kind of look at, if I'm in Michigan, do I move to Idaho to get a job, right? So we're going to try and balance this out as much as we can, but moving is expensive, so it doesn't necessarily happen all the time. Part of the thing to look at is, where do your unemployment statistics come from? If I just give you a conventional unemployment number, I'm going to give you a number. But it's more interesting to me to have the conversation of, did I include part-time workers? Did I include retired people? Did I include kids? Well, maybe I don't want to hear about all of those people, but what if I was curious about people who are unemployed and people who have stopped looking for work? Maybe that's an interesting statistic to look at. Maybe in this graph, what I want to look at is unemployment people and people who are working part-time but would work full-time if I could offer them that job. So that's kind of where you need to look at where the statistics you're looking at are coming from. If I am running for office, I could give you an unemployment number as low as 3 or 4% or as high as 10 or 15%, depending on what I include in that number that I'm giving to you. So here's a quick little look at who is employed and who is unemployed to give you some ideas.
Welcome to another exciting episode of Are You Unemployed? Here's your host, the Bureau of Labor Statistics.
Hello, jobless Americans. The unemployment figures have been released, so it's time to see if you're officially unemployed. Let's meet our contestants. Contestant number one, you were recently laid off. Have you found a new job?
No way. No one's hiring me right now. I haven't even bothered to look.
I'm sorry. You are not in the labor market and therefore are not officially unemployed. Contestant number two. Says here you lost your job as an auto worker. Have you found a new one?
No, not yet. The industry isn't doing so well. I need a job, but I stopped looking because the plant closed down.
I'm sorry. You're not working, but you are not officially unemployed either. Contestant number three. You were an airline pilot until a recent downsizing. Have you found work?
Well, I'm still looking for a real job. All I could get was 4 hours a week.
Oh no. That 4 hours sounds unemployed. Contestant number four. You lost your job as a stockbroker. Have you found another?
No, I haven't yet. But I did look at the classifieds last week.
Contestant number four. You just counted the official unemployment rate.
But what about the other contestants?
They're jobless. Why don't they count? Well, if we included them, that would make the number much worse. But we can't go around doing millions more jobless Americans. It could start a panic and you'd be totally screwed.
This program is canceled due to recession.
Okay, so there are 4 types of unemployment you need to be familiar with. Frictional, structural, cyclical, and seasonal. Frictional unemployment is simply search unemployment. Are you looking for a job? You're frictionally unemployed. If I decided to quit my job in Idaho and move to, I don't know, Texas, I would be frictionally unemployed until I got another job. Structural unemployment is simply a mismatch between the skills of the unemployed workers and the skills needed for the available jobs. Think about the example I gave you earlier. If INL is hiring and they're looking for a nuclear engineer and the only people who are applying are waitresses at the Applebee's, that's not a match between skills that are out there in the workplace and skills that are needed in those jobs that are open. Cyclical unemployment is the one that we really worry about. This is deficient demand unemployment, when there's not enough aggregate demand in the economy to provide jobs for everyone who wants to work. So this is when the economy is in a recession. This is when things are really tough. And even if you're qualified, even if you're looking for work and you're doing the right things and you can't find a job, that's cyclical unemployment. The other one is simply seasonal unemployment. If you're between seasonal jobs, you're unemployed. So if you're a lifeguard and you're working an outdoor pool in the summer, in the winter, you're unemployed. If you work at a Christmas tree farm and it's April, you're probably unemployed unless you are actually working the farm that grows the Christmas trees. Okay? So the graph for the labor market is going to look exactly like supply and demand, except for you need to understand that there's a difference here. I am not talking about supply and demand of jobs. I am talking about supply and demand of labor. So that's when it looks exactly like supply and demand. So my demand for labor, if the price is really low, my demand will be pretty high because at $1 an hour, I want a lot of people to do work for me. If the price is really high, my demand for labor is going to be pretty low. If it's going to cost me $50 an hour to get something done, I might as well just do it myself. Same thing with supply. If I offered you $50 an hour to do something, you are super willing to offer me quality hours that you want to work. If the price is really low, and I'm like, hey, for $2 an hour, will you do? The answer is probably no, and the quantity that you're willing to supply is very, very low. So when we talk about structural unemployment, we need to understand that there are things out there that actually make this happen. Things like the minimum wage. The minimum wage is a on-purpose imbalance in the market where we set a wage that is higher than the equilibrium rate. And what is that going to do? That's simply going to cause a structural unemployment problem where there is more supply of people who are looking for jobs and less demand for those people because we just don't want them to work at that price. So you have some things like, in a good month, we destroy 4.5 million jobs. But the good news is we usually create that many or more jobs within our economy as well because it's so big. So you have to understand the effect of minimum wage, the effect of labor unions, and public policy side effects that may affect the labor market that you may not have thought of before. So we have something in our economy called the natural rate of unemployment. We call this full employment. So this is where you have frictional and structural unemployment, but there's no cyclical unemployment. That's that 4 to 6%, usually 5% for the United States that we want to make sure is there. Cyclical unemployment is where we have problems. That's where we have actual unemployment. That's where the economy is not doing well. So the natural rate for unemployment in France and Germany is actually around 8 to 10%, and it's higher than the United States. Because, well, if you're in Europe, you get better unemployment benefits. So our benefits usually last for about 6 months. Benefits in European countries are indefinite. They can last forever. You can be unemployed in France for as long as you want to be, which makes it not so stressful to look for a job. So you have that higher natural rate of unemployment. And in some cases, you have countries where it's actually really difficult to fire a worker. The United States, if I want to fire you, I give you 2 weeks notice and you're out. In some cases, I can just fire you. But look at this. In China, if I fire you, I have to pay you almost 100 weeks of severance pay to get you out of my job, which means that I'm not going to fire you as much. Unemployment is just going to be a different beast in a country like China or Germany than it is like in the United States and Japan. So when we measure unemployment, we have to look at the labor force participation rate and the unemployment rate. These numbers are generally going to be calculated for you. But remember, you have to look at that labor force, who is in the labor force and who is not in the labor force to see what's actually happening. We also have to deal with hidden unemployment. In some cases, we have discouraged workers who have stopped looking for jobs, which become long-term unemployed people. People on disability aren't necessarily counted as unemployed. People who are working part-time but would work full-time if you offered them the job. And sometimes you have to count jobs held by illegal immigrants that would be held by Americans. Now, that's not necessarily a stat that's really big, but it is part of that number. If you look at Americans who are not in the labor force, it kind of makes sense, right? Because if you're 65 plus, these people tend to be retired. 16 to 24 tends to be in school. And so you tend to see most unemployment happening in this kind of middle age range. One of the things that we found in the last recession is that unemployment changed. It used to be that most people were unemployed 5 weeks, 10 weeks, maybe 14 weeks was really the max. But after the last recession, what we found is that the norm tends to be that you're unemployed for longer than you were in the past. The labor market is changing, and with that, people are going to have to adapt how they do this whole employment thing. So again, to look at like what would I include or not include, if I give you an unemployment rate, it might just be the orange line. But if I include discouraged workers, it goes up to the purple. If I include marginally attached workers who are kind of working, it goes up to the yellow line. If I include involuntary part-time workers, it goes up to the dark purple line. So you can kind of see how that unemployment rate could grow if you start to add in different characteristics of people who aren't working. Now, go to Google Classroom, take the mini quiz, and hopefully you get 100%. Thanks. Bye.